Chapter 1. The Binding That Should Not Have Been. Rain fell like a curtain of iron over the city, turning cobblestones to mirrors, and drowning the gaslight in pools of amber shadow. Eleanor Thorne pressed herself against the alley wall, her breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts that carved frost into the November air. Her hands trembled not from cold, but from the weight of what she'd done. She'd stolen from the Vesper house, not gold, not jewels. Something far more dangerous, a grimoire bound in human skin, its pages inscribed with forbidden magic that predated the covenant itself. The book now burned against her ribs beneath her soaked cloak, its presence a constant hum of wrongness that made her teeth ache. Eleanor didn't know what the symbols meant. She only knew that Lord Cassius Vesper wanted it badly enough to send his hunters into the mortal districts, and that meant it was valuable. Valuable enough to buy her passage out of this cursed city. Valuable enough to start over somewhere the past couldn't find her. Thunder cracked overhead. She flinched, pushing deeper into the shadows. You smell of desperation. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once, low, precise, and utterly devoid of warmth. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs as a figure materialized from the darkness ahead. Not stepped, materialized. One moment the alley stretched empty before her. The next, he stood 10 paces away, perfectly still in the downpour. He was tall and angular, dressed in black that seemed to drink the light. His face was carved from marble, beautiful in the way ancient statues were beautiful, cold and terrible and utterly inhuman. Rain slicked his dark hair back from a high forehead, revealing eyes that caught the distant gaslight and threw it back like polished obsidian. Eleanor knew what he was before he spoke again. Vampire. The book, he said, extending one pale hand. Give it to me, and you may leave with your life. Her fingers closed around the grimoire beneath her cloak. I don't know what you're talking about. A faint smile touched his mouth, barely there, more threat than amusement. Lies sit poorly on mortal tongues. I can hear your heartbeat from here. It quickens when you speak untruths. He tilted his head, studying her with the detached curiosity of a scholar examining an insect. You took something from Cassius Vesper's private library. A grimoire written in old Coven script. He's sent word to every house in the city, a blood price on the thief's head. 50 years of service to whoever returns it. 50 years. Eleanor's throat went dry. To a vampire, that was nothing. To a human, it was a lifetime of slavery. Then you should take me to him, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Claim your reward. I should. He moved then so fast her eyes couldn't follow, couldn't process the blur of motion until he stood directly before her, close enough that she could see the inhuman stillness of his chest, the absence of breath. But I find myself curious. His hand shot out. Eleanor jerked back, but he was impossibly quick, his fingers closing around her wrist with crushing precision. Not painful, not yet, but absolute, inescapable. And then something happened. The air between them shattered. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't visible. But Eleanor felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the deep animal part of her brain that still remembered how to fear predators. A shock wave of sensation that tore through her chest and wrapped around her heart like iron chains pulling tight. The vampire went rigid. His eyes widened, the first genuine emotion she'd seen on that marble face, and for a heartbeat, he looked almost human. Almost afraid. No, he breathed. The word hung between them, small and devastated. Eleanor tried to pull away, but his grip held firm. She could feel something building in the space where their skin touched, a heat, a pull, a recognition that made no sense. Her pulse hammered in her ears, each beat echoing with a rhythm that wasn't entirely her own. What she started. Be silent. His voice cracked like a whip. He released her wrist as though it burned him, stepping back with preternatural speed. When he looked at her again, his expression had shuddered into something flat and dangerous. This is impossible. What's impossible? Eleanor's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. The place where he'd touched her throbbed with phantom warmth. The vampire was silent for a long moment, rain streaming down his face like tears. When he finally spoke, each word seemed dragged from somewhere deep and unwilling. The mate bond. It's an old magic, nearly forgotten. When a vampire encounters the one soul meant to, he stopped, jaw clenching. It doesn't matter. It can't matter. Why not? His laugh was bitter. Because I am Kieran Ashworth, Lord of the Blackthorn House, and you're mortal. Because the bond is irreversible, and I will watch you wither and die while I remain unchanged. Because the covenant forbids such pairings, and any vampire who defies it is granted the mercy of sunrise. His eyes found hers, and for a moment, she saw the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Because I have lived 300 years, and I have no intention of losing everything for a stranger who stole from my enemy, Eleanor's mind reeled. Mate bond, ancient magic. 300 years, then let me go, she whispered. I should. Kieran's hands flexed at his sides. I should drain you dry and throw your corpse in the river. Or better deliver you to Cassius myself and let him extract his revenge slowly. He paused. But I can feel your heartbeat in my chest now. I can taste your fear on my tongue. And the thought of harm coming to you makes me want to burn this city to ash. Thunder rolled overhead. The rain intensified, turning the alley into a drowning place. So here is what will happen, Kieran said quietly. We will be friends. Nothing more. You will return the grimoire. I will ensure your safety, and we will both pretend this bond doesn't exist. His smile was sharp as broken glass. Until I find a way to sever it permanently, Eleanor should have run, should have screamed, should have done anything except nod slowly, clutching the stolen book tighter against her ribs, but she had nowhere else to go, and in that moment, soaked and shaking in a dark alley with a vampire who looked at her like salvation and damnation wrapped in one impossible package, Eleanor Thorne made the first of many terrible choices. All right, she said. Friends. Kieran's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those ancient eyes, relief perhaps, or regret. It was already too late. Chapter 2. The House of Thorns. Kieran's sanctuary was not what Eleanor expected. She'd imagined something gothic and ostentatious, a crumbling manor draped in cobwebs, perhaps, or a candlelit crypt beneath the city. Instead, he led her through rain-slicked streets to a townhouse in the merchant quarter, its facade modest and unremarkable. The kind of building a successful tradesman might own. The kind that drew no attention. Inside, Kieran said, his voice clipped. He hadn't looked at her directly since the alley, hadn't touched her again. He moved like a man trying to maintain distance from an open flame. Eleanor hesitated on the threshold. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to take her chances with Cassius Vesper's hunters, rather than trap herself alone with a vampire. But the rain had soaked through her cloak, and exhaustion pulled at her bones like weights. She'd been running for 3 days. She had nowhere left to go. She stepped inside. The interior surprised her again. No coffins or torture implements. Just a scholar's dwelling, walls lined with books in a dozen languages, a desk scattered with maps and correspondence, furniture that looked comfortable rather than menacing. A fire burned low in the hearth, and the scent of old paper and leather filled the air. You live like a human, Eleanor said. Before she could stop herself, Kieran moved to the fire, adding wood with mechanical precision. I was human once. The habits persist. He straightened, still not looking at her. There's a guest room upstairs. Second door on the left. You'll find dry clothes in the wardrobe. They belong to my sister. Belong? She's dead. The words were flat, final. 80 years now. Eleanor felt the weight of that statement settle between them. 80 years. His sister had been human then. Had died while he remained. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be. Kieran finally turned to face her, and the expression on his marble features was carefully neutral. Death is the natural state for your kind. It's what you were made for. He gestured toward the stairs. Go, change. We have matters to discuss. Eleanor wanted to argue, to push back against the casual cruelty of his words. But she was shivering now, her teeth chattering despite the warmth of the room. She nodded and climbed the stairs on unsteady legs. The guest room was simple but clean, a narrow bed with white linens, a washstand, a wardrobe of dark wood. Eleanor peeled off her soaked clothing with numb fingers and found a nightgown in the wardrobe, soft cotton that smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. She dressed quickly, then caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked like a ghost. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around a face gone pale with exhaustion. The scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw, a gift from her late husband's final rage, stood out livid against her skin. She looked away. When she descended the stairs, Kieran stood by the fire, a glass of something dark red in his hand. Wine, she hoped, though she suspected otherwise. Sit, he said, nodding toward a chair near the hearth. Eleanor sat, tucking her bare feet beneath her. The warmth of the fire made her realize just how cold she'd been. Kieran remained standing, watching her with those unreadable obsidian eyes. Tell me why you stole from Cassius Vesper. I needed money. The grimoire is worthless to a mortal. You can't read Old Coven script. You can't use the magic it contains without vampire blood to fuel the rituals. He took a slow sip from his glass. So you intended to sell it? To whom? Eleanor hesitated. There's a collector in the eastern provinces. He doesn't ask questions. Andreas Kane. It wasn't a question. Kieran's mouth tightened. A necromancer with delusions of grandeur. He would have killed you the moment you delivered the book. I would have been careful, you would have been dead. The word cracked through the room like thunder. Kieran set his glass down with controlled force. Kane has a taste for mortal women. He keeps them alive for weeks while he drains them slowly. My house found the last one in pieces. Eleanor's stomach turned. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was alone in a vampire's home, wearing his dead sister's nightgown, with nowhere to run. Kieran seemed to sense her fear. His expression softened fractionally. I'm not going to hurt you. You said you wanted to drain me in the alley. I said I should. There's a difference. He moved to the other chair and sat with a natural grace, leaning back as though exhausted. As though vampires could be exhausted. The bond makes it difficult to think clearly about you. What exactly is this bond? Eleanor asked quietly. You said it was old magic. Kieran was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was distant. The first vampires were created by a blood ritual performed during a lunar eclipse. The magic that made us immortal also bound us to the concept of balance. For every life we take, we owe a debt. For every century we live, we become more detached. The mate bond is the world's cruelty. It ties an immortal soul to a mortal one, forcing us to feel everything. We've lost connection, hope, the passage of time. And you feel this? Now? Yes. The word was barely audible. Your heartbeat echoes in my chest. Your emotions bleed into mine. If you died, I would. He stopped, jaw clenching. It doesn't matter. It's an evolutionary trick. Nature's way of preventing vampires from becoming complete monsters. Some of my kind search for their mates. They believe the bond is sacred, but you don't. Kieran's laugh was hollow. I've watched everyone I've ever loved turn to dust. My parents, my sister, friends, lovers, allies. I learned centuries ago that attachment is just another word for inevitable loss. His eyes found hers, and for a moment, she saw the profound loneliness lurking beneath his cold exterior. So no, I don't believe in sacred bonds. I believe in survival. The fire crackled between them. Rain hammered against the windows. Then why not let me go? Eleanor whispered, because Cassius Vesper will hunt you until you're dead. And because Kieran's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Because despite everything I've said, I find I cannot bear the thought. Chapter 3. The mark of House Seliner woke to silence, not the comfortable quiet of an empty house, but the absolute stillness that came when a predator held its breath. She lay frozen in the narrow bed, her heart hammering as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint orange light across the unfamiliar room. Someone was watching her. Your pulse jumps when you dream. Kieran's voice came from the corner, soft and observational. Nightmares? Eleanor sat up slowly, clutching the blanket to her chest. He sat in a chair she hadn't noticed before, perfectly motionless in the shadows. How long had he been there? Do you always watch people sleep? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Only when they're carrying stolen property that could start a war between houses. He rose with fluid grace, moving to the window. Dawnlight was beginning to creep across the rooftops, pale and hesitant. You should know what you've taken. What you've brought into my home. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to the nightstand, where she'd placed the grimoire. Its leather binding seemed to pulse in the dim light, hungry and alive. It's just a book, she said. It's the Codex Sanguinis. The first book of vampire law, written by the founder herself. Kieran's reflection in the window glass was sharp as a blade. It contains rituals that predate the Covenant. Magic that was banned for good reason. What kind of magic? He turned to face her, and in the growing light, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features. Vampires didn't tire, she knew. But Kieran looked hollowed out, haunted. The kind that allows a mortal to become immortal without a vampire's permission. The kind that binds souls across death. The kind that could dissolve the mate bond entirely. His eyes locked onto hers. Cassius wants it because his mate rejected him centuries ago. He's been searching for a way to sever their connection ever since. Understanding dawned cold in Eleanor's chest. And you want it for the same reason. Kieran didn't answer. He didn't need to. Before Eleanor could respond, a sound shattered the silence, glass breaking downstairs, followed by footsteps. Multiple sets. Moving fast. Kieran's entire body went rigid. They've found us. Who? Cassius's hunters. He was across the room in an instant, gripping her arm. Get dressed. Now. We have perhaps 30 seconds. Eleanor's hands shook as she threw on her still damp dress from the night before. Downstairs, she could hear voices, cold, aristocratic, speaking in a language that made her teeth ache. The window, Kieran said, already opening it. There's a roof ledge. Can you climb? In this? Eleanor gestured at her skirts. Then you'll fall gracefully. His tone was sharp, but his hands were careful as he helped her through the window. The morning air bit at her skin, and the ledge was slick with rain. Move along the roof toward the eastern chimney. There's a ladder. What about you? I'll buy you time. Kieran's expression was grim. Go, now. Before she could argue, he was gone, moving back into the house with inhuman speed. Eleanor heard the door slam open below, heard voices raised in anger, and then sounds she couldn't identify. Impacts, shattering. A scream cut short. She moved along the ledge, her fingers scrabbling for purchase on wet stone. The city spread out below her, still half asleep in the gray dawn. One slip, and she'd be dead before she hit the cobblestones. The ladder was exactly where Kieran said it would be. Eleanor climbed down with shaking limbs, the grimoire still pressed against her ribs beneath her dress. When she reached the alley below, she ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move, had to. A figure stepped out of the shadows ahead. Eleanor skidded to a halt. The vampire before her was elegant in the way a viper was elegant, beautiful and deadly, with silver hair pulled back from a face that could have been carved from ice. He smiled, and his fangs caught the light. The little thief, he purred. Cassius will be pleased. Eleanor backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The alley was a dead end. The vampire moved closer, his movements languid. You've caused quite a bit of trouble for a mortal. Impressive, really. Though I confess I'm curious, why would Kieran Ashworth shelter you? He's not known for his charity. I don't know what you're talking about. Another lie. The vampire inhaled deeply. Though this one is interesting. You smell of him. Of blood bond and claimed territory. His eyes widened with sudden understanding. Oh, this is delicious. Does Cassius know that the great Lord Ashworth has found his mate in a common thief? Eleanor's mind raced. If this vampire told Cassius, it would make things infinitely worse. The bond would become leverage. A weapon. Please, she whispered. Just let me go. The vampire laughed. I think not. You're worth far more alive than. He never finished the sentence. Kieran appeared behind him like death incarnate, one hand clamping around the vampire's throat. There was no elegance in the movement, no ceremony, just brutal efficiency. The silver-haired vampire's eyes went wide, his mouth opening in a silent scream. You should have run faster, Kieran said softly, then he twisted, and something in the vampire's neck made a sound like breaking branches. The body crumpled to the cobblestones, already beginning to decay into ash. Kieran turned to Eleanor, and his eyes were no longer human at all. They were black from edge to edge, ancient and merciless. We need to leave the city, he said. Tonight, before Cassius realizes what you mean to me. Eleanor stared at the pile of ash at her feet, at the vampire who'd just killed to protect her, and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. All right, she breathed. Kieran's expression didn't change, but when he took her hand to lead her away, his grip was almost gentle. Chapter 4. Sanctuary and Shadows. They traveled by carriage through the dying light, leaving the city behind in a blur of smoke and gaslight. Kieran had arrangements. It seemed safe houses scattered across the countryside, places where vampires could shelter from the sun and from their enemies. He said little during the journey, his attention fixed on the darkening road, as though he could will the horses to move faster. Eleanor watched him from the opposite bench, studying the sharp lines of his profile. He'd changed into traveling clothes before they left, dark wool and leather that made him look less like a scholar and more like what he truly was. A predator. A killer. She'd watched him turn another vampire to ash without hesitation. Stop staring, Kieran said, without looking at her. I'm not. I can feel your gaze. Through the bond. His jaw tightened. It's distracting. Eleanor looked away, heat rising in her cheeks. I didn't ask for this bond either. No, you just stole from the most vindictive vampire in the Eastern Territories and dragged me into your mess. Now he did. Look at her. His dark eyes glinting in the carriage's dim interior. Though I suppose I'm equally to blame. I should have killed you in that alley. Why didn't you? The question hung between them. Outside, the landscape shifted from manicured estates to wild country forests pressing close to the road, their branches skeletal against the twilight sky. I don't know, Kieran said finally. His voice was quieter now, almost vulnerable. The moment I touched you, everything I'd built over 3 centuries, every wall, every defense, it all crumbled. I could feel your fear, your desperation, your grief. He paused. You've lost someone, recently. It wasn't a question. Eleanor's throat tightened. My husband, she whispered. 6 months ago, and you mourned him. No, the word came out harder than she intended. I celebrated. Kieran's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his marble features. He hurt you. Again. Not a question. Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to the scar on her face, tracing the raised line from temple to jaw. For 3 years, she said. He was charming when we met. A respected merchant, well-liked in society. By the time I understood what he truly was, it was too late. I was his wife, his property. She met Kieran's gaze, refusing to look away. He died falling down the stairs, drunk. At least, that's what the magistrate concluded. But that's not what happened. Eleanor's heart hammered. She'd never told anyone the truth, never even whispered it aloud in the dark. I pushed him, she said. He came at me with a knife, screaming that I'd ruined his life, destroyed his reputation. And I pushed him, watched him fall, listened to his neck break. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled in her lap. I'm not sorry. Silence filled the carriage. Eleanor waited for judgment, for disgust. Instead, Kieran leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. Good, he said softly. You survived. That's all that matters. Something in Eleanor's chest loosened. She'd expected condemnation from a creature who'd lived for centuries, who must have seen countless acts of violence. Instead, he looked at her with something almost like understanding. The scar, Kieran continued, his eyes tracking the line on her face. It bothers you. It marks me. Everyone who sees it knows I was weak, victimized. It marks you as a survivor. His voice was firm. Scars are proof we endured what should have killed us. Before Eleanor could respond, the carriage lurched to a halt. Kieran was on his feet instantly, his hand on the door handle. Stay here, he ordered, but Eleanor could already hear what had stopped them, voices outside. Multiple speakers, their tones sharp with authority. Through the small window, she glimpsed torches and the glint of weapons. Kieran stepped out of the carriage, and Eleanor heard him speak in that aristocratic vampire tongue, formal, controlled. The response was aggressive, challenging. She couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the rhythm of an interrogation. They were looking for her. Eleanor's fingers closed around the grimoire beneath her cloak. The book seemed to pulse against her palm, warm and insistent. Without thinking, she opened it, her eyes scanning the incomprehensible symbols that covered the pages, and then impossibly she could read them. The letters shifted, reforming into something her mind could parse. Instructions for a ritual, a spell of concealment that required only will and blood. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She pulled a pin from her hair and pricked her finger, letting 3 drops of blood fall onto the page. The grimoire drank them eagerly, the leather binding growing hot beneath her hands. Outside, one of the interrogators shouted. Eleanor heard the distinctive sound of steel being drawn. She pressed her bloodied finger to her forehead and whispered the words from the page. The world inverted. She felt herself disappear, not physically, but from perception. Like she'd slipped between the threads of reality, becoming a gap in the world's attention. Through the carriage window, she watched Kieran's head snap around, his eyes wide with shock. He couldn't see her, and no one could. The interrogators continued their questioning, but their attention had lost focus. They kept glancing past the carriage, as though forgetting what they'd been looking for. After several tense minutes, they stepped back, and the carriage lurched forward once more. Kieran climbed back inside, his expression thunderous. What did you do? Eleanor released the spell with a gasp, suddenly visible again. The grimoire fell from her numb hands onto the bench. I don't know, she breathed. The book, I could read it. I used a concealment ritual. That's impossible. Mortal blood can't fuel vampire magic without. Kieran stopped, his eyes dropping to the grimoire. When he looked at her again, something like fear flickered across his face. Unless you're not entirely mortal. What? The bond. His voice was hollow. It's not just connecting us. It's changing you. Eleanor stared at her hands, still trembling, still ordinary. But when she closed her eyes, she could feel something new coiling beneath her skin. Something that tasted of blood and starlight and endless dark. How long? She whispered. Kieran's silence was answer enough. Chapter 5. Blood and Boundaries. The safe house was a ruin. Not metaphorically, literally crumbling stone and collapsed timber, hidden deep in a forest that felt older than memory. But beneath the decay, Kieran led Eleanor down stone steps into catacombs that had somehow remained intact. Torches flickered to life as they descended, responding to his presence with magic. Eleanor was only beginning to understand. This was a monastery once, Kieran said, his voice echoing off ancient walls. Before the Covenant, before vampire houses ruled the night, the monks knew what we were and offered sanctuary in exchange for protection. What happened to them? They died. As all mortals do. He pushed open a heavy wooden door, revealing a chamber that looked almost comfortable, a bed with clean linens, shelves lined with preserved food and bottled water, a desk with fresh candles. This will suffice for tonight. Tomorrow we'll decide our next move. Eleanor stepped inside, exhaustion pulling at her bones. The carriage ride had taken hours, and the magic she'd used impossible. Terrifying magic had left her feeling hollowed out. You need to eat, Kieran said, already moving to the shelves. The grimoire's magic demands payment. It took your blood, but it will take more if you're not careful. How do you know? Because I've seen what happens to mortals who use vampire rituals without proper preparation. His hands were steady as he set bread and cheese on the desk. They burn through their own life force, age decades and days. The magic consumes them from within. Fear spiked cold in Eleanor's chest. Then why didn't you stop me? I didn't know you could use it. Kieran turned to face her, and for the first time since the carriage, he looked uncertain. The bond shouldn't work this way. It creates emotional resonance, not magical transference. What you did reading the grimoire, casting that spell, it should have killed you. But it didn't. No, which means something is very wrong. He moved closer, and Eleanor fought the urge to step back. Or something is very right, depending on your perspective. What do you mean? Kieran was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. There are legends, old stories about bonds so powerful they transcend the normal rules. Bonds that don't just connect to souls, but begin to merge them. The vampire slowly becomes more human, capable of feeling sunlight's warmth for brief moments, tasting food again. And the human becomes something other, not vampire, but not entirely mortal either. Eleanor's breath caught. Is that what's happening to us? I don't know. Such bonds are rare enough to be mythical. Kieran's jaw tightened, and every recorded case ended in tragedy. The human either died from the transformation or begged for true immortality. And when the vampire refused to turn them, he stopped. They what? They used forbidden magic to take immortality by force. Magic like what's in that grimoire. He gestured to the book she still clutched. And they became something monstrous. Neither human nor vampire. Creatures driven mad by hunger and power. The words settled over Eleanor like ice water. She looked down at the grimoire, its leather binding innocent in the candlelight. But she could still feel it humming beneath her fingertips. Hungry and patient. I won't use it again, she whispered. Yes, you will. Kieran's voice was matter of fact. Because Cassius is hunting us, and you'll do whatever it takes to survive. I understand that impulse. I've built my entire existence around it. He moved to the door. Eat, rest. I'll keep watch. Wait. Eleanor set the grimoire down carefully. You haven't fed, have you? Since we met? Kieran went very still. That's not your concern. You're weaker than you should be. I can tell you move slower during the interrogation. Your eyes aren't as dark. She took a breath, her heart hammering. The bond lets me feel it. Your hunger. Stop. If you're going to protect me, you need to be at full strength. I said stop. Kieran's voice cracked like a whip. When he looked at her, his eyes had gone completely black, the predator surfacing. You don't understand what you're offering. I'm offering blood. That's what you need, isn't it? Not from you. The words came out strained. Never from you. Why not? Because feeding creates intimacy. It's not just sustenance, it's sensation, emotion, memory. Everything you are would pour into me, and everything I am would mark you. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. And because the bond already makes it difficult to think clearly around you. If I tasted your blood, if I felt your life flowing into me, he stopped, shaking his head. I would never let you go. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Eleanor could feel the truth of it through the bond, his hunger, yes, but also his fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of becoming attached. Fear of caring for something he would inevitably lose. Would that be so terrible? She asked softly. Kieran's laugh was hollow. You have no idea. I've spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of not caring, of existing without attachment. And now you stand here offering me everything I've denied myself, and you expect me to refuse gracefully. I expect you to be honest. With me and with yourself. Eleanor moved closer, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself rigidly away from her. You felt something when we met, something that terrified you. Hope. The word was barely audible. I felt hope. And hope is the most dangerous thing a vampire can feel. Before Eleanor could respond, a sound echoed through the catacombs, distant but distinct. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Moving fast. Kieran's head snapped toward the door. They've found us already. How is that possible? The grimoire? His voice was grim. Cassius must have bound a tracking spell to it. We need to move, now. But as Eleanor grabbed the book, she felt something else, a presence pressing against her mind, cold and vast and ancient. And she heard a voice that wasn't quite sound, more like memory made tangible. Little thief, you've led me on quite a chase. Chapter 6. The Lord of Vesper, Cassius Vesper, stood at the entrance to the catacombs like a king surveying conquered territory. He was beautiful in the way poisonous things were beautiful, golden-haired and sharp-featured, dressed in midnight blue that seemed to drink the torchlight. His eyes were the color of frozen silver, and when they found Eleanor, they glittered with something between amusement and malice. Kieran Ashworth, his voice was silk over steel. How long has it been? 50 years? 60? You've been remarkably successful at avoiding me. Not nearly successful enough, apparently. Kieran had positioned himself between Eleanor and the entrance, his body coiled with barely restrained violence. What do you want, Cassius? What I've always wanted. What's mine? Cassius descended the steps with languid grace, flanked by 4 other vampires, all ancient, all deadly. The Codex Sanguinis. Surely you understand its value. You, who've spent centuries running from connection, from feeling. I understand you're desperate enough to hunt a mortal thief across 3 territories. Kieran's voice was cold. That speaks poorly of your house's resources. Cassius's smile sharpened. Mock me if you wish. But we both know that book contains the only ritual that can sever a mate bond permanently. No more echoes of another's heartbeat. No more unwanted emotions bleeding through. His eyes slid to Eleanor. Though I confess I'm curious why you sheltered this particular mortal. She's pretty enough, I suppose, but hardly worth starting a war over. Eleanor felt Kieran's tension spike through the bond. He was trying to hide it, what she meant to him, but Cassius was old, observant, unless... Cassius's eyes widened with delighted understanding. Oh, Kieran, tell me it isn't true. Tell me the great Lord Ashworth, the vampire who swore off all attachment after watching his sister die, hasn't been ensnared by a common criminal. She's under my protection. That's all you need to know. Your protection? Cassius laughed, the sound echoing off ancient stone. How wonderfully tragic. Does she know what that means? That you'll watch her wither and die while you remain unchanged? That every gray hair, every wrinkle, every weakening breath will torture you? He moved closer, and his guards fanned out, blocking any escape. Or perhaps you're planning to turn her, make her like us. Though that would require you to break your sacred vow, wouldn't it? Kieran didn't answer. Eleanor could feel rage and something darker, shame coiling through the bond. What vow? She asked quietly. He didn't tell you? Cassius's smile was cruel. Kieran swore before the entire covenant that he would never create another vampire, that he would never condemn someone to this existence after what it did to his family. A noble gesture, truly. Though I wonder how long that nobility will last when you're old and dying in his arms. Eleanor's chest tightened. She looked at Kieran, saw the truth written in the rigid line of his shoulders. He'd never intended to offer her immortality, never intended to keep her, just friends, he'd said. Until he found a way to sever the bond. Give me the grimoire, Cassius said, extending one pale hand. and I'll let you both walk away. You can have your doomed love story. Cherish your few mortal decades together. I have no interest in causing you pain. Well, no additional pain. No, Eleanor spoke before Kieran could. I don't think I will. Cassius's expression darkened. You presume to refuse me? A mortal? A mortal who can read your precious codex. Eleanor opened the grimoire, feeling its power hum beneath her fingers. The symbols shifted and reformed, offering her choices, possibilities. A mortal who's already used its magic once. Eleanor. Don't, Kieran started, but she was already reading. Already pricking her finger with the pin from her hair. 3 drops of blood fell onto the page, and the catacombs filled with sudden pressure like the air before a lightning strike. The spell she chose was simple, ancient, a ward against those who bore ill intent. The words left her lips in a language she didn't know, and the world listened. Light erupted from the grimoire, not white or golden, but the deep crimson of arterial blood. It spread across the floor in intricate patterns, forming a circle around Eleanor and Kieran. When Cassius tried to step forward, the light flared brighter, and he jerked back with a hiss of pain. Impossible, he breathed. That ritual requires vampire blood to activate. You shouldn't be able to. His eyes narrowed. The bond. It's not just connecting you. You're drawing power from him. Eleanor swayed the room, tilting around her. Kieran caught her before she fell, his arms solid and surprisingly gentle. Enough, he said, his voice directed at Cassius. You've seen what she's capable of. Walk away while you still can. She's dying. Cassius gestured at Eleanor, at the way her skin had gone gray, at the blood trickling from her nose. That magic is burning through her mortality. Another spell like that, and her heart will stop. He smiled. So by all means, keep playing with forces you don't understand. You'll solve my problem for me. Kieran's arms tightened around Eleanor. She could feel his heart, or the echo of what his heart used to be, hammering in sync with hers. Could feel his terror bleeding through the bond. We're leaving, Kieran said. And you're going to let us? Am I? Cassius tilted his head. You're trapped in a catacomb with no exit except through me and my guards. Your mortal is collapsing from magical exhaustion. And you haven't fed properly in days. I can smell your weakness from here. He spread his hands. I think I'll simply wait for her to die. Then the grimoire will be mine, and you'll be broken. A fitting punishment for the vampire who thought himself above the rest of us. Eleanor's vision swam. She could feel darkness pulling at the edges of her consciousness. The grimoire's magic, demanding payment she couldn't afford, but she could also feel something else, Kieran's desperate need to protect her, flowing through the bond like molten gold. Kieran, she whispered, feed from me. No, if you don't, we both die here. And Cassius wins. She met his eyes, saw the war raging behind them. Please, trust me. For a long moment, Kieran didn't move. Then slowly, he lowered his head to her throat, and the world caught fire. Chapter 7. The Taste of Souls. First touch of Kieran's lips against her throat sent electricity racing through Eleanor's veins. Not pain, she'd braced herself for pain, but sensation so overwhelming it bordered on ecstasy. She felt his hesitation, the tremor in his hands as they cupped the back of her head, steadying her. Then his fangs pierced skin, and the world dissolved. She'd expected it to feel like violation, like being consumed. Instead, it felt like recognition. Eleanor gasped as Kieran's consciousness flooded into hers, 3 centuries of memory and emotion crashing through the bond like a tidal wave. She saw his human life in fragments, a sister with dark curls laughing in a summer garden, parents who'd loved him fiercely, a world that had been smaller and somehow kinder. She felt the night he'd been turned, the terror, the agony, the horrifying realization that he would never die. She watched his sister grow old while he remained frozen at 28, watched her marry, their children, weaken with age, felt his helpless rage as he sat by her deathbed, unable to save her, unable to follow her into death. I can't do this again, she heard him think, the words bleeding directly into her mind. I can't watch another person I love turn to dust. But beneath the fear, beneath the carefully constructed walls, Eleanor felt something else. Something Kieran had been denying for centuries. He was so terribly, achingly lonely, and in that moment, Eleanor understood. The coldness wasn't cruelty, it was armor. Protection against the unbearable weight of immortal solitude. You're not alone, she thought at him. Not anymore. Kieran jerked back from her throat as though burned, his eyes wide and horrified. Her blood stained his lips, and his pupils had blown wide, swallowing the black entirely until his eyes looked like mirrors reflecting starlight. What did you? His voice fractured. I felt you. Inside my mind. That shouldn't be possible. Eleanor touched her throat where his fangs had pierced skin. The wounds were already closing, healing with unnatural speed. And she felt different, stronger, like something fundamental had shifted in her bones. The bond, she breathed. It's not just connecting us anymore. We're merging. Cassius's voice shattered the moment. He stood at the edge of the blood ward, his expression a mixture of fascination and disgust. I've only read about this in the oldest texts. The convergence, they called it. When a bond becomes so powerful it begins to erase the boundaries between the souls. Kieran pulled Eleanor closer, his body, shielding hers. But she could feel the change in him, the strength flooding back. Yes, but also something more. Her mortality bleeding into his immortal coldness. Her warmth softening his edges. It's a myth, Kieran said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Cassius gestured at Eleanor. Look at her. She's healing faster than any mortal should. Her eyes, do you see it? The pupils are dilating in response to your presence, the way of vampires do when near their mate. He laughed, sharp and bitter. And you, old friend, you're breathing, actually drawing air into lungs that haven't functioned in 300 years. Kieran went rigid. Eleanor felt his chest moving against her back, the automatic rise and fall he'd abandoned centuries ago. What's happening to us? She whispered. You're becoming something new, Cassius said. Neither human nor vampire. A true bonded pair to souls sharing one existence across the divide of mortality and immortality. His expression darkened. And you're breaking the Covenant's most sacred law. Such pairs are forbidden. They destabilize the balance, threaten the order we've maintained for a millennium. Since when do you care about the Covenant's laws? Kieran's voice was cold. Since they serve my purposes. Cassius smiled. You see, if the other houses learn what you're becoming, they'll demand your execution. Both of you. And I'll be more than happy to carry out that sentence after you've given me what I want. Eleanor felt Kieran's rage spike through the bond, felt his instinct to attack. But he was thinking tactically now, weighing odds. 5 vampires against 1 weakened lord and a half-mortal woman. Even with her blood strengthening him, the math was impossible. There's another option, Eleanor said quietly. Let me destroy the grimoire. Both vampires stared at her. You've lost your mind, Cassius said flatly. Have I? Eleanor pulled the book from where she'd dropped it, feeling its weight in her hands. You want it because it can sever the mate bond. But Kieran and I were beyond that now. The convergence, you called it. The grimoire's magic can't touch us anymore. She looked at Cassius. But it can still hurt you. As long as this book exists, you'll be bound to a mate who rejected you. You'll feel her joy with someone else. Her love for a life that doesn't include you. Cassius's face went carefully blank, but Eleanor saw the flicker of pain beneath. What are you proposing? I'll destroy the codex. Remove the temptation for anyone to use it, including us. And in exchange, you tell the Covenant nothing about what we're becoming. You let us disappear. And why would I agree to that? Because, Eleanor said softly, you're tired of being alone too. You're tired of feeling an echo of happiness you can never have. If the book is gone, eventually the bond will fade to background noise. You'll be able to move on. Silence stretched through the catacombs. Eleanor could feel Kieran's surprise through the bond, his reluctant admiration. Cassius studied her for a long moment, his silver eyes unreadable. Then he smiled a real smile, tinged with genuine sadness. You're either incredibly wise or incredibly foolish. I haven't decided which. He gestured to his guards who stepped back from the ward. Destroy it then. But know this, if I ever see either of you again, the Covenant will hear everything. Your existence is a threat to the Order. Don't make me regret my mercy, Eleanor nodded. She opened the grimoire one final time, feeling its power thrumming beneath her fingers. Then she spoke a single word in that ancient language, and the book burst into flames. The fire was cold and black, consuming the leather and parchment in seconds. When it faded, only ash remained, and with it, Eleanor felt something inside her break or perhaps finally settle into place. Chapter 8. What remains? Cassius left without another word, his guards trailing behind him like shadows. The sound of their departure echoed through the catacombs until only silence remained silence and the acrid smell of burned magic. Eleanor stared at the pile of ash on the stone floor. The grimoire was gone, the power it had offered her, The dangerous possibilities it contained all reduced to nothing. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt hollow. You shouldn't have done that. Kieran's voice came from behind her, quiet and strained. Eleanor turned to face him. He stood with his back against the wall, as far from her as the small chamber allowed. His eyes were still that strange, starlit black, and she could see him fighting for control, fighting against the pull of the bond, against the taste of her blood still singing through his veins. It was the only way, she said. You gave up your protection. That book was the only leverage we had. His hands flexed at his sides. And you destroyed our only chance to what? Sever the bond? Eleanor stepped closer, watching him tense. Is that what you wanted? To erase this? Yes. The word came out fierce. No, I don't. Kieran's jaw clenched. You don't understand what you've condemned yourself to. The convergence isn't a gift, Eleanor. It's a curse. You'll age more slowly now, but you'll still age. You'll still die, and I'll be bound to you for every moment of it, feeling your mortality like a countdown in my chest. Then turn me. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable. Kieran's expression shuddered. I can't or won't, both. He moved to the far side of the chamber, putting more distance between them. I swore an oath before the covenant. I watched what immortality did to my family, the isolation, the slow erosion of humanity. I won't inflict that on you, even if I'm asking for it, especially then. Kieran's voice cracked. You don't know what you're asking. To be frozen at this age forever. To watch everyone you've ever known turn to dust. To feel yourself becoming colder, more detached, until one day you wake up and realize you haven't felt genuine joy in a century. Eleanor moved closer, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. Is that what happened to you? Yes. The admission came out broken. I was kind once, quick to laugh. I loved poetry and music and long philosophical debates. And year by year, decade by decade, I felt all of it slipping away. Until all that remained was survival, strategy, the careful maintenance of distance. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were ancient and devastated. The bond brought it back, all the feeling I'd buried. And its agony, Eleanor, caring this much, needing this much. She reached for him, and he caught her wrist, gentle but firm. Don't, he whispered. Please, your blood is still in my system. If you touch me now, I won't be able to maintain control. Maybe I don't want you to maintain control. Kieran's grip tightened fractionally. You don't mean that, don't I? Eleanor held his gaze. You felt my memories when you fed. You saw what my life was, trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing me, too afraid to leave, too broken to fight back. And when I finally did fight back, when I finally took my life into my own hands, I had to run, hide, steal, just to survive. And now you're free, Kieran said. You don't need to chain yourself to I'm not free. I'm hunted by Cassius, marked by the covenant, changing into something I don't understand. The only thing keeping me alive is you. She turned her wrist in his grip, not pulling away, but pressing closer. And the only time I've felt truly safe, truly seen, is when I'm with you. That's the bond talking, is it? Eleanor let him feel her sincerity through their connection. Or is it just the truth you're too afraid to accept? Kieran's control wavered. She felt it through the bond, the walls he'd maintained for centuries crumbling under the weight of her blood, her proximity, her stubborn refusal to let him push her away. I'm afraid, he admitted finally, terrified actually, of what you make me feel, of what I'll become if I let myself love you. And what's that? Vulnerable. The word came out like a confession. Human. Eleanor reached up with her free hand, touching his face. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Would that be so terrible? I don't know how to be human anymore. Then maybe, Eleanor said softly, we figure it out together. You teach me how to be something more than mortal. I teach you how to be something more than stone. Kieran's eyes searched her face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. Eleanor let him see everything, her fear, yes, but also her determination, her choice. The convergence will continue, he said quietly. You'll keep changing, becoming something between human and vampire. There's no precedent for what you'll become. What we'll become together, I know, and I still can't turn you, even if you beg me. My oath stands, I know that too. Eleanor smiled slightly. So I'll just have to age disgracefully and make you regret your noble principles. Something shifted in Kieran's expression, the faintest hint of humor breaking through the anguish. You're infuriating, you're insufferable, I'm going to watch you die, not for a long time if I have anything to say about it. Eleanor pressed her forehead to his. And until then, you're stuck with me, friend. Kieran's laugh was soft and broken. We are so far past friendship. I know. Eleanor felt his surrender through the bond, not defeat, but acceptance. So what do we do now? Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on her wrist where he still held her. Finally, he said, we run. We find somewhere the Covenant can't reach us. And he paused, the words seeming to cost him. We try to build something together. A life of sorts. His smile was tentative, fragile as new ice. Though I warn you, I'm terrible at domesticity. I haven't cooked a meal in 3 centuries. Good thing I'm an excellent cook then. Eleanor? Yes, thank you. His voice was barely audible. For not running. For choosing this. For choosing me. Eleanor kissed him, then soft and brief, a promise rather than passion. When she pulled back, his eyes had returned to their normal black, and something like peace had settled over his features. We should go, she said. Before Cassius changes his mind. Agreed. Kieran released her wrist finally, but immediately took her hand instead. There's a cottage in the Northern Territories. Remote, defensible. We can shelter there while we plan our next move. Eleanor nodded, shouldering the pack she'd brought. As they climbed the catacomb stairs together, she felt the bond humming between them, no longer a chain, but a bridge. And for the first time since that rain-soaked alley, she felt something like hope. Chapter 9. Between Twilight and Dawn, cottage was exactly as Kieran described, remote, nestled in a valley where pine forests pressed close and the nearest village was a 2-day walk. It was small but well-maintained, with thick stone walls and windows fitted with iron shutters. A safe place. A hidden place. They arrived 3 nights after leaving the catacombs, traveling only in darkness, sleeping in abandoned barns and forgotten crypts. Kieran moved with purpose now. The hesitation burned away. He still kept careful distance, still watched her with wary intensity, but something fundamental had shifted between them. Eleanor felt it in the way he steadied her over rough terrain, in the way his eyes tracked her constantly, as though afraid she might vanish, in the quiet moments when he forgot to maintain his immortal stillness and simply was breathing, blinking, present in a way vampires rarely were. The convergence was changing them both. Inside the cottage, Eleanor found evidence of careful preparation: dried herbs hanging from the rafters, preserved food in the cellar, a well-stocked woodpile. The bed was large and draped with heavy furs against the mountain cold. A single bed. I'll take the floor, Kieran said immediately, following her gaze. Don't be ridiculous. The bed is large enough for both of us. Eleanor, we're bound together by magic neither of us fully understands. I think we're past worrying about propriety. She set down her pack, suddenly exhausted. The journey had taken its toll. She could feel the strange dual nature of her body now, mortality and something else warring for dominance. Besides, you don't sleep, so technically, you'll just be watching over me. From a closer vantage point, Kieran's expression suggested he found this reasoning deeply flawed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he moved to light the fire, his movements efficient and practiced. Eleanor watched him work, studying the lines of his body. He'd removed his coat, and his shirt clung to lean muscle that shouldn't exist on a creature who didn't breathe, didn't eat. But the convergence was affecting him too. She could see it in the faint color touching his pale skin, in the subtle rise and fall of his chest. You're staring again, he said, without turning around. I'm trying to understand. What? How you can be 300 years old and still look like you're barely older than I am. How you can be dead and yet so. She gestured helplessly. Present. Kieran stood, brushing ash from his hands. The firelight painted shadows across his face, softening the marble hardness. Vampires aren't dead. Not truly. We're paused, caught in the moment of transition between mortal and something else. Most of us lean into the something else over time. Become more creature than person. But not you. Not yet. He moved to the window, looking out at the darkened forest. Though there were decades when I came close. When I stopped feeding on humans entirely, because I couldn't bear the intimacy of it. Survived on animals instead, growing weaker and more detached. My house thought I'd gone mad. What changed? My sister's great-great-grandson sought me out. He was dying consumption and he wanted to meet the family legend before the end. Kieran's voice softened with memory. He looked so much like her. Same dark curls, same stubborn chin. And he told me stories about his grandmother, who'd told stories about her grandmother, who remembered her uncle Kieran, who'd disappeared mysteriously in his 20s. He didn't know what you were? No, the family had decided I'd run off to sea and drowned. A faint smile touched Kieran's mouth. I let him believe that. Let him think I was a distant cousin who'd inherited the family resemblance. We talked for hours about history, about how the world had changed. And when he died 3 weeks later, I realized I'd spent an entire human lifetime avoiding connection, avoiding pain, and all I'd done was create a different kind of agony. Eleanor moved to stand beside him at the window. So you started engaging with the world again. In small ways, never enough to form real attachments, never enough to risk. This? He gestured between them. And then you stumbled into my territory with a stolen grimoire and impossible courage, and 3 centuries of careful control shattered in an instant. I'm sorry. Don't be. Kieran finally looked at her, and his eyes were warm, almost human in their depth of feeling. I'm not anymore. Terrified, yes. Certain this will end in tragedy, absolutely. But not sorry. The admission hung between them, fragile and precious. Eleanor reached for his hand, and this time he let her take it. His fingers were cool, but not cold. Another change. Teach me, she said quietly, about what I'm becoming, about vampire nature, house politics, everything I need to know to survive in your world. Our world now, Kieran corrected. He squeezed her hand gently. Very well. Lesson 1. Vampire hierarchy. There are 7 great houses, each controlling different territories. Vesper is one of the oldest, which is why Cassius has so much influence. My own house Blackthorn is smaller but strategically positioned. We control the mountain passes and trade routes, and the Covenant, a council of representatives from each house. They maintain the laws that keep us from descending into open warfare. Laws about feeding, about turning humans, about interactions with mortal governments. He paused. And laws about bonds like ours, which is why we need to stay hidden. Eleanor absorbed this, her mind working through implications. What happens if they find us? Execution. For both of us. The convergence is considered an abomination, a blurring of the lines that keep vampire society stable. Kieran's jaw tightened. But they won't find us. Not here. This valley is warded with old magic, older than the Covenant itself. As long as we're careful, we're safe. And if we're not careful, then I'll fight. The words were simple, absolute. I'll burn the world down before I let them take you. The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent warmth flooding through Eleanor's chest. Through the bond, she felt his determination, his willingness to sacrifice everything. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, she said softly. They stood together at the window as night deepened around the cottage. Outside, snow began to fall soft and silent, covering the world in white. Eleanor felt exhaustion pulling at her, the strange dual nature of her body demanding rest. Come, Kieran said, guiding her toward the bed. You need sleep, true sleep, not the restless half-consciousness you've been managing. Eleanor didn't argue. She climbed beneath the furs, and after a moment's hesitation, Kieran lay beside her on top of the covers, maintaining that last thread of propriety. But his hand found hers in the darkness, and his presence was a steady anchor against her dreams. Kieran, she whispered. Yes, thank you for choosing this too. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Sleep, Eleanor. I'll keep watch. And surrounded by warmth and safety and the quiet certainty of the bond, Eleanor finally let herself rest. Chapter 10. The promise of Forverliner woke to the smell of blood, not the iron tang of violence, something warmer, deliberate. She opened her eyes to find Kieran sitting at the desk, a small glass vial in his hand. Morning light filtered through gaps in the shutters, painting his profile in shades of amber. What are you doing? She asked, her voice still rough with sleep. Kieran looked up, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. Researching. There are texts here about the convergence. Records from the early days, before such bonds were forbidden. He set down the vial, his own blood, she realized. I'm trying to understand what's happening to you. To us. Eleanor sat up, drawing the furs around her shoulders. The cottage was cold. The fire burned down to embers. And what have you found? That we're playing a dangerous game. Kieran stood, moving to rebuild the fire. The convergence changes both parties. You're aging more slowly, your cells regenerating with vampiric efficiency. You'll live centuries instead of decades. But you'll never be fully immortal. And he paused, feeding wood to the growing flames. I'm becoming more mortal. Breathing, bleeding, feeling in ways I haven't for 300 years. Is that so terrible? It makes me vulnerable, killable. He turned to face her. If another house discovers I'm weakening, they could challenge Blackthorn's territory, slaughter my people to claim the mountain passes. Eleanor's chest tightened. Then we separate. Break the bond before it's too late for that. Kieran's voice was gentle but firm. The convergence is permanent once it begins. We're bound now, for whatever time we have left. He crossed to the bed, kneeling beside it so they were eye level. But there's something else. Something the texts mention. A ritual. What kind of ritual? One that equalizes the bond. Instead of one party gaining mortality while the other gains immortality, both would meet in the middle. You'd become something like a vampire, ageless, powerful, but retaining your humanity, your warmth. And I would retain enough mortality to remain present, connected. Eleanor's heart hammered. That sounds too good to be true. It requires sacrifice. Kieran took her hands, his expression grave. A blood exchange during the lunar eclipse. Complete vulnerability from both parties. And most importantly, consent. True, willing consent, given without coercion or desperation. When's the next eclipse? 3 days. He squeezed her hands gently. But Eleanor, you need to understand what you'd be choosing. This would bind us permanently. No possibility of separation. Our lives would be entangled forever. If one of us dies, the other follows within days. And you'd be choosing a half-life, neither mortal nor vampire, never able to fully rejoin human society. Eleanor studied his face, the careful control barely masking desperate hope. What do you want? I want you to choose freely, without pressure from me, or the bond or fear of what's hunting us. His voice cracked slightly. I want you to choose the life you deserve, even if that life doesn't include me. That's not what I asked. Eleanor cupped his face, feeling the impossible warmth of his skin. What do you want, Kieran? For a long moment, he was silent. Then quietly, I want forever with you. I want to teach you vampire politics and have you teach me how to laugh again. I want to wake beside you for centuries and never take it for granted. He stopped, closing his eyes. I want to be selfish. For the first time in 300 years, I want to choose something for myself instead of duty or honor or survival. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Then choose me, Eleanor, choose me, she repeated firmly. Choose us. I've spent my whole life making myself smaller for other people, surviving instead of living. And then I met you, and for the first time I felt seen, known, chosen. She kissed him softly. So yes, I consent. I choose this. I choose you. Kieran's control shattered. He pulled her close, his forehead pressed to hers, and she felt his relief and joy and terror flooding through the bond in equal measure. 3 days, he whispered. And then I'm yours. Completely. You already are. They spent those 3 days in careful preparation. Kieran taught her the rituals, requirements, the words, the precise moment of the eclipse, the blood exchange that would seal their bond permanently. Eleanor learned the rhythm of vampire existence, the heightened senses, the way time moved differently when you had centuries instead of decades. She learned, too, the small intimacies of sharing space with him, the way he still forgot to eat food, but watched her with fascination when she did, the way he read aloud to her from ancient texts, his voice turning poetry into music, the way he held her at night, no longer maintaining careful distance, his body curved protectively around hers, and she learned that loving Kieran Ashworth meant loving his grief as much as his strength, his fear as much as his courage. The night of the eclipse, they climbed to a clearing above the cottage. The moon hung huge and copper red in the sky, and the air hummed with old magic. Kieran had prepared everything: a circle of stones, candles that burned with cold flame, and a blade that looked older than countries. He stood at the center, waiting, his expression solemn. Last chance, he said, as Eleanor joined him. Once we begin, there's no turning back. Eleanor took the blade from his hands. I know. The ritual was simple and profound. They spoke the words together, promises in a language that predated kingdoms. They cut their palms and pressed them together, blood mingling as the eclipse reached totality. And they kissed as power surged through them, remaking their bond into something unbreakable. Eleanor felt herself change, not painfully, but fundamentally. Her senses sharpened, her strength increased, but she remained herself, warm, human, alive. And Kieran, she felt his walls crumble entirely. Felt 3 centuries of isolation shatter as mortality and connection flooded back into his bones. When the eclipse passed, they stood together in the clearing, transformed and bound. How do you feel? Kieran asked, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor smiled, taking his hand. Like I've finally come home. They returned to the cottage as dawn approached. Neither of them would die with the sun, another gift of the convergence, but old habits persisted. They climbed into bed together, no barriers between them now, and Eleanor felt the bond settle into place. Permanent, unbreakable, perfect. Eleanor? Kieran whispered against her hair. Thank you. For vanishing into my life. For refusing to leave. He pressed a kiss to her temple. For choosing forever. Eleanor turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. They were no longer entirely black or entirely human, something in between. Something new. Thank you, she said softly, for letting me. Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside the cottage, wrapped in each other's arms, Eleanor and Kieran finally found what they'd both been searching for. Not immortality or mortality, but something far more precious, home.